the Wiggly Podcast. The Archers, but real.
Hello, listener. Welcome to this week's electric episode of the Wiggly Podcast. And our little Heather isn't with us again this week. She's gallivanting yet again in the, I was going to say sunnier climes, but naturally freezing, bitterly cold climes of New York. And she's gone off to do some exciting things there, and I think she'll enlighten us with what she's been up to next week. But this week I am joined yet again by the ever lovely Rachel Harris and the ever not so lovely Farmer Phil.
Well, thank you, Rich. That's most kind.
That's a bit unfair, seeing as he's had his
haircut. I am unfair to Phil, but no less unfair to him than he is to me. So I can get my
obviously smarting, Rach, from one or two comments that have gone up on Facebook concerning a certain photo, I suspect.
Oh, yes. There's been some interesting comments about that photo.
Wasn't a halo anyway.
No, definitely not. So anyway, lovely to see you both. We talked about this last year, but I've been watching Autumn Watch this year.
I thought you hated Autumn Watch, Richard.
Yeah, I used to. Well, no, I hated it, but there were elements of it that I found very difficult
He likes Kate
embrace.
But he doesn't like Bill Oddie.
Well, it's a funny thing, you know. Bill, I as much as I hate to say it, I'm warming to Bill. I really am warming to Bill, and it's a kind of a weird thing. I mean, I like people with their own idiosyncrasies, and but Bill. Yeah,
did you say
previously,
idiosyncracies
that's
or
exactly
hideous?
What I said. Well, you know, you read into it what you like. But I'm definitely warming to him, and I've quite enjoyed watching him. My Sarah, however, still has problems coping with all things Bill Oddie like. But yeah, I know, I'm really enjoying it. I've really enjoyed the show. And for whatever reason, they've made it slightly more thoughtful, I think. It's not quite as base, this is a mouse kind of thing as it has been in the past. So yeah, I've really enjoyed it. So I watched that. And of course, they've been shooting lots of fallow deer. Which we've got
with a camera, not a shotgun.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's something, of course, that's close to my heart because they're filming all those wonderful fallow deer down in the New Forest, which is an area that I used to knock around in quite a lot. I used to have a girlfriend down there, you know, and I used to hang out with her dad, who was a gamekeeper. And of course, we used to go out and look after the animals and things like that. But the deer, of course, are barking at home like mad at the moment. So yeah, brilliant stuff.
Don't deer do a lot of damage? I'm sure that Phil could tell us about this.
They're a complete nightmare in many ways, but I like them. I mean, they do a lot of damage to trees, a fearsome amount of damage to trees. They're also quite successful. We've got our herd of fallow deer here, and they reckon that just to maintain numbers, you have to cull 30% of their numbers every year, which, if you reckon there's were a herd of about 100 here. When I first came here, I counted over 90. I lost count at 90 in one field. I was ploughing at night.
Yeah,
and they all came out of the wood. There's a lot fewer now.
Yeah.
But of course, they do a lot of damage to particularly young trees, crops.
We talked about this a while ago, but you've got some fantastic interviews, haven't you? Some archaeology interviews.
Well, you might recall that we interviewed Tim Hovard from Hereford Archaeology concerning the potential for, at that point, we thought there was possibly a Bronze Age site in one of our fields that he'd identified through aerial photography. Well, since then, he has excavated the site and one other. We've had our own version of Time Team, and they've lurked around the field and dug it up and one thing and another. Yeah. And I and Heather interviewed him, on the site with some of his thinking and some of his findings. And it, as you'll hear, wasn't as we thought at all.
OK, well, let's listen in to what Big Phil's been up to.
So we're back out in Stonyfield with Tim Hovard from Hereford Council Archaeological. Well, I can never remember what your name is, but that'll do.
That'll do. We've been called worse.
And you might remember that last time we spoke to Tim, he was plotting where he was going to dig holes in our field of grass seed to discover the origins of the marks that he'd picked up in an aerial photo. And a couple of weeks ago, we had the JCB in and stripped off the topsoil, which was a bit like peeling away the elements of a map, because it did show exactly the same features as the photo did. But I'll let you describe, Tim, what you found subsequent to that, because you then excavated one or two of the things that you found and sorted out what you've dug up.
Right, Phil, what we've done is we've excavated 2 trenches, a 10-metre square trench on the top of the hill where we saw the aerial photo of what we thought were 2 ditches with a gap in between them, and hoped that that was going to be an entranceway. And we thought what we'd try and do is pick up the line of one of the ditches as it headed to the east by putting a sort of 25-metre long, 1.5 metre wide trench running up from the hedge upslope to try and intercept the line of the ditch to see if it did continue this far.
Of course, at that point you were suspecting that you might be looking at something Bronze Age, so sort of 5,000 odd years old, so that the hedge and the trees and so on wouldn't have been
not
so
at all. No, in fact this was the edge of the river terrace for a loop in the River Wye, although the river's now over a mile away from this point.
The way it's raining, Tim, it might get closer.
It may well quite quickly at the moment, yes.
So Blake Mere, was that Blake Mere because it was right on the river at that point then, or...?
It was probably after the river had moved and left an oxbow lake, and it was probably quite dark, so it was Black Mere.
Oh.
That's probably the origin.
Yeah.
But what we're looking at here is these 2 trenches, one of which, as you say, when we started to remove the topsoil, we came straight down, thankfully, on what the aerial photograph showed of an interrupted ditch with an entranceway. The second one, we were less successful in some respects in that we completely and utterly failed to find any ditch, which would seem to suggest that the ditch turns before it reaches this point. But as a sort of bonus, we've found a cremation burial in the southern part of the ditch with a pit about 10 centimetres away from it. This would suggest that you've got some form of marker put in the pit next to the cremation to show people where the cremation burial was located. Now at present we don't have any dating from the burial or from the pit to tie it to anything else that we've found. We can of course do carbon-14 dating from the material from the cremation. But what we're hoping to do before we finish here is to open up a tiny bit more of your field and see if this is the isolated burial, or whether we're actually standing in a cemetery.
And your tentative theory at the moment is that the enclosure on the top of the hill has not actually turned out to be Bronze Age, that you think it's entirely Roman, and you're possibly thinking that it is something to do with this potential cemetery burial zone that was their version of the village hall, if you like.
Yes, I mean this is our sort of theory in progress at least. If this cremation burial is linked to the enclosure, we're only standing, 60-70 metres away from the other trench. The other trench has the 2 ends of the ditch. The only finds we've had are Roman in date, and they're doing something slightly unusual in this ditched enclosure.
Sounded like, from what you were saying, they were getting on the Wampo one way or another. But...
Well, quite possibly. They were certainly eating well, that's certainly the case. We've recovered most of the skeleton of a cow from a relatively small area, what seems to be most of a dog, some juvenile sheep or lamb, and also some wildfowl bones, all in the very bottom of the ditch and all in fairly discrete piles. Add that together with the meagre but unusual pottery that we're getting. This is large vessels, not locally produced, some Samian ware imported from the continent as well, and some rather large and very thick pieces of glass, not window glass but vessel glass. This would suggest that whatever they're doing up there isn't purely domestic. People are coming to this enclosure, perhaps feasting, perhaps getting rid of the vessels that they're transporting some of this food and probably drink in as well, and then filling it in fairly rapidly afterwards.
You said one of those pots was as big as me.
That's not very tall then.
Well, it's getting towards the 5 foot mark, yes.
Watch it, 5 foot half an inch here. What would you put in that pot then? Because you couldn't tip it, You couldn't,
no, you'd have to ladle things out of it.
Yeah.
So one would imagine that it's liquid of some sort, whether that's some form of beer, some form of wine, or the Roman favourite for spicing dishes up, which is a form of fish sauce called garum, which is effectively putrefied fish. But it was to their taste, apparently.
Yeah.
And the fact that you think that these were large pots and glass and so on and imported vessels, does that suggest, well, you suggested to me that tended you to the idea that it was quite well-to-do people involved, not your average peasant. Does it also suggest that it's early on in the Roman occupation because it had come from Europe or not?
I think it's been traded through. We don't know the exact dates of the pottery yet. It's got to be processed and then sent off to specialists. But you're right in that certainly whoever was up here seemed to have pulled out all the stops. They were using some of the best materials available. And certainly as far as the glass vessel's concerned, it's something that would be beyond the means of most people or a huge section of society.
And do you think there would have been the locality that this served? What sort of area do you think it would cover? Because, I mean, our nearest well-known Roman settlement would be over the other side of the river, as it is now, at Kenchester. I don't know of any this side of the river around here. You might know more than I, but would they have come from that far away? Or did
they may. I mean, it depends. If we are right and what they're doing is sort of having a wake either prior to or post burying people here, it depends upon the individual and where they're from, what links they have either through trade or through the social ladder, as to whether people would have come from Bishopston, Kenchester area. But don't forget, we have not far from here a number of villa sites. We have the main road which crosses from Kenchester over the Wye at the Weir and goes through Madley, which is now Stony Street, and down towards Abergavenny. So we're not far from one of their sort of, I suppose, the A49 in the Roman period. It's a good place to be centred on.
And we have found Roman bits and pieces on Stockley Hill, which is not very far.
Exactly.
You know, where they travel. The road over Stockley Hill, I think, is probably quite an old route for whatever reason.
I'm sure. And the other thing that I'm pretty sure about is that there would have been a road running sort of northwest southeast as well. So you have the road running over the river, but you also have the road running up this side of the river as well. And that's probably reflected in the settlement out the other side of Moccas at Bredwardine. We know there's a Roman settlement at Bredwardine. There was probably either a bridge or a fording point at Bredwardine. So you're here in between two major crossing points of the river.
But of course, I suppose, even whether it's as old as Roman, it may be a natural fording point, but it
may
always,
well, but yes,
was a ford.
Exactly, yes.
You said that they smashed the pots up. Why would they do that? Was that like that they got carried away and had a whoopee party, or were the pots the person who had died, so they smashed their belongings?
We don't know. It would take a lot of smashing to break some of the pots that we've recovered up.
Yeah.
You know, they're getting on for 3/4 of an inch thick. You'd really have to go out of your way to accidentally knock one of these things over.
Good
and the fact
party,
that,
then.
Very good party. And the fact that they're 5 feet high, you know, you wouldn't be, you'd be able to notice them before you fell over them, that's for sure. But yes, they may well have actually broken them on purpose to signify the end of the wake, the end of the feast, and just to take them out of circulation and bury them with everything else that went with that feast and with the remembrance of the individual they've just buried.
And in your mind, is this party at night or is it in the daytime? Because would you bury somebody at night and have a big fire? Or I can't quite picture the scene of everyone turning up. And
it's difficult to say. I would imagine, having seen the size and the amount that people seem to have been eating up here, that it would have been a fairly long affair. And it could have been a sort of all afternoon and well into the evening do.
No change there then?
Oh no. So it's not just a quick half hour. This is, it's not a speedy gathering here. I think this would have been making a day of it, if not making a day and a night of it.
Yeah.
And this sort of feature, so that an enclosure on top of the hill and the potential, although we haven't confirmed it, of a burial ground not very far away, is this something that you've seen before, or are we looking at something that's quite unusual?
Are you excited?
Oh, I'm always excited about archaeology, yes. In some ways it is unusual. It's unusual in that this is in a rural setting, or appears to be in a rural setting. Quite a few of our cemeteries that we know of, at least, are next to villages, next to towns, or directly associated with large farmsteads. So they're near central places. This appears to be not quite in the middle of nowhere. We know that there is Roman activity around here in the close vicinity, but it's certainly not near a major village or small town. So this may be, if you like, a sort of family plot. This may be for a well-to-do family that has a sort of villa farm in the near vicinity, rather than a sort of municipal burial ground for an urban area.
Well, as you commented just now, Ev, it's not a bad place to be planted, is it?
No, but I just wondered, does it mean they had some dreadful disease, so they stuck them out in the middle of Blakemere and we're going to pick it up in a minute?
No, I don't think that's the case at all. No, the way that they're buried here, or at least from this one burial, appears to be perfectly normal.
Yeah.
And the fact that they're hanging around celebrating, by the look of it, the fact that someone's life and someone's died suggests that they didn't have some horrible lurgy. People were more than willing to stand next to them and see them off.
And as an archaeologist, I mean, you know, when you start to dig, do you get obsessed with the fact that you might be missing the next key place? You know, I've already seen that little glint in your eyes. That can't leave it because you might find something amazing.
Yes and no. It depends. I mean, you have to be quite strict with yourself. You have to set a number of questions that you want to answer. You'll probably never answer all of them, and the chances are that you'll answer a few, and then that leads to 20 more questions that you haven't thought of at the beginning. But yes, there is an aspect of always wanting to know a little bit more, just for the sake of another couple of tons of soil to be shifted.
Another few square yards of my grass seed crop.
Yes, I'm afraid so, Phil. We have this sort of adage that the most interesting stuff is either under the spoil heap or in the field next door.
Yeah.
Well,
and I just got last question. Do you find that farmers are enthusiastic when you approach them generally, or is there hesitation about, you know, having the whole farm cordoned off for Hereford Archaeological Society to build some monumental display? What's the general feeling? 'Cause I know our farm's been quite excited about it.
I think there is sort of cautious excitement, and I think cautious excitement is probably the best word, because, you know, it is an unknown quantity. We never know what we're going to find until we start excavating. That's one of the questions that everyone asks before we start. What are you going to find? And how long are you going to be here? And they're the two almost impossible things to answer. But in general, we find that landowners, certainly in Herefordshire, are very interested in the heritage that they're looking after. I mean, after all, you're custodians for your part of Herefordshire, and it's nice to know what you've got.
Definitely.
I should say that when I reported to our land steward the sort of initial findings, David Curtis, for the Duchy of Cornwall, his first question was, are they going to schedule it or something? Am I not going to be able to charge you rent on that end of the field?
No, we're not, don't worry. It's all right, I've had a talk with David as well.
So with that, we'll look forward to the next nugget of information, but I want to go back up the hill and explore a drain that you've discovered, which is definitely not Roman, but it's in a very strange place for a drain. So we'll go and have a look at that.
Thanks for that, Phil. It really is like the Archers, but in real life, isn't it?
Well done, Rach. You got the words in the right order there. Anyway, let's go and hear Monty's latest nugget.
Montycast, a weekly fact on wiggliness. Ecover was founded in 1980 by Franz Bogat, who wanted to create a washing powder that didn't contain harmful phosphates. Another Montycast, a weekly fact on wiggliness. Next week.
Thanks, Monty. That was lovely. Now, Rachel, you've got a little announcement to make, haven't you, about a fab event that we're having at the end of this week?
Yes, that's right. On Friday, the 14th of November, we're having the grand Wiggly Floristry opening. So everybody's invited to come and have a look at the shed, see our wonderful... The shed? The florist. The shop's known as the shed, isn't it? It's generally known as the shed.
Right.
But for this occasion, we'll call it the floristry.
Right.
And they can come and watch Rosie and Laurie, our lovely florists, putting together bouquets and posies and all sorts of wonderful, wonderful flowery things. And while they're with us, they can have a glass of mulled cider and a mince pie. Wow. So do come along.
So it's worth a look, you reckon?
Definitely.
Wonderful. Well, I'm certainly going to be looking forward to that. And I guess that's it. So it's bye-bye from me.
And bye-bye from me.
I'll do anything for a mince pie. It's bye from me.